Speaking of which, hello, ladies and gentlemen, adventurers of all shapes and sizes, and welcome to another RPG stream. Your DMs. Oh, I'm already hitting my table. Your DMs, as always. Myself, Rob. To my. I'm gonna get it right this time. Nope. This side is Alex, and then below me is Jason. And as always, I have not changed my name, so I'm gonna do that real fast. I don't
It's
know.
just a part of the ritual.
Yeah, right.
Change Rob's name, point
Start.
out who's who, who's where.
Yeah.
Everything's great.
So today, what we're going to be talking about is a couple of different things, but kind of in a similar vein. We're going to be discussing sort of reimagining old tricks, old spells, classes, that sort of thing. There is a new magic set coming out soon that is very Viking based. Of course, your Assassin's Creed that came out recently, also very Viking based. We're going to talk about how to make your sessions feel either more metal, more Viking, slightly different sort of changes in flavors and varieties. I'll probably inevitably end up talking about magic guns because I feel like when it comes to reskinning, firearms are one of the things that more often than not people want. And I think that you don't need to go too far to be able to make the rules for those. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. If some of you remember, I think it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. No, man, time means nothing. Sometime last year, too far ago
Oh,
for us
yes.
to be able to even know. One of the things that we showed on the Zulu Shopping Network was an RPG called Morkborg. Borgmark.
Morkborg.
Sorry, say again.
Morkborg.
Yeah.
Mork space Borg. Yes.
Which, if I remember
That is
correctly, that is a Swedish game, Norwegian.
Norwegian. Yes.
Norwegian. It's a Norwegian sort of death metal pen and or tabletop RPG, and thematically it is a very pretty thing. So yeah, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about this?
Morkborg is a very simple role-playing system. It's more based on its actual the feel of like black metal and the like. You know, that kind of like what you'd see spray painted on a little bit of what you'd see spray painted on a van, but it's a little darker than that. You know, it's got a lot of Viking influences. So you got the horned helmets, obviously not real history, but the ones that you want to see. You know, skeletons with Viking helmets.
Yeah.
And wielding giant axes, inspired by the video game Dark Souls and things like that as well. Because I don't know if you guys have ever played those games, but they're very hard. They're very, the visuals are interesting. There's magical stuff. And that's kind of, and the current, like you were saying, the Magic the Gathering set coming out is going to be is heavily influenced by these things.
Yeah.
And so
Death metal and Vikings seems to be kind of the main theme.
Yeah, the very very strong feels, and like what you can use that already exists in D&D to kind of get those feelings. I've personally been running a lot of sessions set in like the Northern Expanse or the Norwegian feeling area, kind of Rime of the Frost Maiden. Actually, I am running Rime of the Frost Maiden as well, which also can have a very strong feel for that. You know, ice cold winters and kind of a bleak outlook.
A feeling of isolation.
Yes, and Norse mythology also falls really quick into that. You know, it's all about like knowing the end of the world is coming.
Ragnarok is basically always like is now when the apocalypse happens.
Yeah.
Is it now or later?
Yeah, but you can take an axe to it when you're playing a role-playing game. So there's nothing better than throwing an axe in the head of whatever is what the end of the world. But yes,
that's so. So it's funny you mentioned the axe. So one of the things I found very interesting, and this is a weird sort of niche thing, but there are the three sort of primary two-handed great weapons. There's the maul, the great sword, and the great axe. And mechanically, I prefer generally a great sword or a maul because statistically, 2d6 is going to average higher than a d12. A d12 is going to have a range between 1 and 12, and there's nothing that will influence, like it's always going to be 1 through 12. Whereas 2d6 are more commonly going to be a 7 or an 8, just by just pure statistics and numbers. However, I think there's a quirk with, I want to say, orcs. When they crit, they get to add an extra dice of the die type. So numerically, it makes more sense to go with the great axe. Now, what's interesting is I feel like more often than not, your great axe is the one that you'll go for because it feels better to have just a big old axe. And don't get me wrong, a maul is nice because you're booping people in the snoot with a giant hammer. But yeah, so
I mean, another thing is, if you want to talk mechanics again, if you're let's say you have the fighting style of great weapon fighting, and you roll a 1 on a d12, well, guess what? You can re-roll that 1, and it turns into a 2. Whereas with a longsword or a maul, you roll 2 6-sided dice. You roll a 1 and a 2. You can roll both of them, and then you get like a 6 and a 6, and then bam! You're just immediately immensely more powerful.
The other one, there's a couple overlooked heavy weapons that fall into the same category as great weapon, is like halberds are, and the benefit to those is you have the reach.
Yeah.
So, because I know that was one I forgot. And
glaives are also a reach weapon that do a d10 of damage.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the feet polearm master where you can just slice and then boop with the back of your polearm.
Get those extra attacks as a bonus action.
Yeah, weapon feats change everything.
Oh yeah. Well, and there's a lot of new ones in Tasha's Cauldron too that are specifically for the different, like, I like that instead of picking a specific weapon, they were like a specific damage type, which I thought was very, very fun. Of like, you can have your piercing, your slashing, or your bludgeoning. But I guess what kind of the thing that I was coming to was, like, the great axe is such a delightfully thematic weapon, but statistically isn't necessarily the sort of the one you want to go for, which I find always very interesting, that kind of dichotomy between statistically superior and just more fun. And I feel like when you're running into things like that sort of, Norwegian death metal style campaign, it's a little bit more interesting to try and think, instead of trying to think of how can I make this as efficient as possible, it's like how can I make it as thematically interesting as possible, which I find is a interesting one.
Yeah. As you're saying, like, one of the things to look at too is like every character class can be kind of found in like Viking lore. They had their skalds, which are their warrior bards, effectively, which is so you can throw together a group pretty much of any class. Some of them are a little trickier to work in, although they had their wizards as well. And you could have fun with a sorcerer with some ice magics. Like a storm sorcerer or something.
Let's say there's also the storm. Was it the? That
Storm
was fun.
Yeah.
Well, and that one's also very thematically interesting too, because the whole thing is like how you get that sorcerer is by, like, in a particularly powerful storm. There's the kid is born. So if you have that sort of like raider culture that has this person that was born in this tempest, like, that could be really interesting as far as like a narrative thing goes.
Yeah. Or there's also like the path of the Storm Herald for the barbarian.
Oh.
There's a lot of storm.
Well, and there's also Tempest is one of your the domains.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got 3. We've got our sorcerer, we've got our arcane caster, we got our divine caster, we got our melee user.
Yeah.
Can we make is there a storm ranger? Because that's a skilled character.
I think there may be. Let me look here, because I've actually I've got it open here, and I was looking at those, and the ranger is. I think there's something that's close. The closest I can think of off the top of my head is kind of the.
Is there a bard
Horizon
subclass that's particularly stormy?
Not really.
I don't know about stormy.
I mean, a hunter works, in terms of.
Do like a giant slayer style thing.
Yeah. Or just
that'd be cool.
Because especially if you're dealing with that whole Norse thing, you have the Jotun or the like the frost giants are effectively the giants from Norse mythology, and then you have like your dwarves are common in dwarf mythology, elves, and so it's all like, I mean, you just kind of. And the other thing you have to remember is that the Vikings tried to conquer everything, so you don't even have to set it in the snow You got, you want to go to England and steal all the gold. Um,
I
so
have a Dragonborn character who seems to want to do only that. Steal
Go to
all
the
the
British and
gold.
steal the gold.
yeah,
Yes, it's everyone and steal all their gold.
well, that's just Murder Hobo D&D.
Murder
That's just
hobo. Yeah.
that's a feature, not a bug.
What's the difference between a murder hobo and a Viking?
You make it.
Yeah,
Well, they have a home that they come back to.
That's a good
Specifically,
point.
D&D characters almost never have a home to come back to, hence the being hobos.
yeah.
So, sorry. The reason I was asking about the thing is because I thought it'd be really fun to have a whole group where each of their subclasses were somehow storm related,
Or
which would be
weather
very fun.
related. I mean, as I was trying to think if there's other closer to weather or the ocean, because you have the Fathom list now.
Druid.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
if you're doing ocean type, I guess storms and oceans are sort of hand in hand. But I was gonna say you got your druid has the circle of land, well, the circle of
Water.
yes. I was trying to look up. I remember in previous editions the Norse gods were included in these sort of main books. Are they
They're in the
included
back of the
in
player.
the DMG?
They're in the
In the
player's
very
handbook.
back of
Oh,
the
they're in the
player's
player's
handbook.
Yeah.
Yeah, towards the back.
Yeah, honestly, I forget sometimes the extra meat that's packed into the back of this book. Like, there's a bunch of monsters in here.
What's funny is you can always surprise players with creatures at the back, especially lower level players, because they think they know a lot of the creatures they're going to run into, and you pull one out of the back of the player's handbook, and it's almost always overlooked. There's a lot of little animals and stuff in there, unless they're playing a druid and they probably noticed it.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, we got Greyhawk and Dragonlance.
Yeah, there's a lot of deity in the back. There's a lot of deity packed in that book.
Oh, non-human deities. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Ooh,
And
Egyptian. There we go, Norse.
it's got a long list. One of the other things I was going to mention is, of course, the DM's guide too. It has the expanded adventuring options, which make a lot of sense. Now, if you're playing Vikings, another option is one of the ones I've never used it, and I've always meant to, is they have the new ability scores, honor or sanity, but honor could have a very big place, kind of a variant of it for a Viking culture.
Yeah.
Among themselves, because it drives a lot of, like you have to make honor saving throws and try not to lose. It's more for like a typical Asian culture, but you can easily tweak it to be that. But one of the biggest ones I was thinking of is the healing options. To make combat more deadly, what's more metal than actually not being able to, is having that wound, is they have like where you do not heal as much. Because you can go from, like 1 hit point and 8 hours later, you are back to fighting trim. Yeah, it's pretty constant, and like some of the rest variants can really mess with you.
Oh, yeah.
Especially
I know there's one variant I saw that was like a short rest is actually like 8 hours, and then a long rest is a whole week.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the gritty realism. Yeah. And then
Gritty
on top of
realism.
they have like, I'm trying to think of one of the other, and they have a bunch of ones like initiative variants. So most of these are really, I mean, they're like the initiative variants is so much bookkeeping. I wouldn't touch it, but because I've read through them before. Like the action options are super useful if you're focusing mainly on combat. Things like climbing onto bigger creatures is a lot of fun.
It has those options in there?
Yep. It's a disarm for normal people, not just for battle masters. And the rules are actually very simple. Marking a prey for somebody else when you're not just a ranger or something, shoving aside, tumbling through. What happens when you...
The shoving is actually one that gets used a surprisingly large amount. But a lot of times because kids are like, I'm going to try and push him here or push him there.
Another one I've been using a lot, and it's very important to something like a Viking type thing, is giving lingering injuries when they hit 0 hit points.
Yes.
So, but that one kind of, it makes you learn a lesson. And there's ways of getting around it. But if you lose, a finger, that's a story, and not just I got knocked to 0 hit points and made my save, or instantly was healed by the cleric, which is usually what can happen a lot.
Yeah.
So having a little additional damage can, I usually make like a constitution save and see if they need to roll on that lingering effects table. But a lot of those tweaking with the damage, you need to make, I think there's a grittiness to running like a Viking or a very combat, because that metal is going to have that heavy emphasis on combat.
Yeah.
And if there isn't a risk, it's not really combat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that actually would be a lot of fun, especially in something like that of like, yeah, having permanent sort of effects to combat. So then, and especially be in a game that's very sort of like in one that's more geared towards the idea of like, we're out raiding things and like and trying to get resources. I guess the question is, what are you trying to get them for? Are you just looking for gold, or are you trying to just like bring back stuff so that your colony can sort of survive? But then also like having to decide what the consequences of your battle might be, you know, or even if nothing else, just having a log of your scars and injuries, so that you can have that sort of beer boasting where you're like, this scar I got from fighting this thing, and this scar I got from that thing, and I'm missing this finger because of the other thing or whatever.
Because I punched a dragon in the face.
Yeah, that whole Jaws scene where they're all drinking and sharing their injuries. One of the other ones that's good is using the lingering injuries table. Is it like a tip that I find fun? Is when they knock a character or creature that's usually a humanoid down to 0, you kind of assume they don't make their saves and they're dead, right? But you can always roll on that lingering injury table where they lost that eye and they're coming back for revenge.
Yeah.
If you think of it that way, that's a lot of reoccurring villains that, he has a limp now, but he is, he's going to hire some people to take you out. Because you killed his whole tribe.
What could be fun about that too is if you have that sort of time limit where essentially when you attack, you're going to have like the big heavily armored city guard that are going to come and like they're more powerful than you, especially because you're on long ships, you can't wear heavy armor, otherwise you hit the water and you drown. Speaking of which, I don't think there are mechanics for trying to swim with heavy armor, but I would definitely implement them in the Viking game.
Xanathars, I want to say. One of the books, because I actually had to look it up, because like technically there aren't rules against sleeping in armor.
Oh yeah.
Base rules, and I had to argue with the player at one point where I'm like, no, you're gonna have to take them off to take a long rest to get your hit points back.
Yeah.
But
I think the rule was like you get one less hit die, or like you ignore hit die or something with hit dice.
I think it's actually in one of the later books though they implemented, because I think it's kind of an overlook that I think was in D&D Next, but didn't make it in the player's handbook type of thing.
Yeah. I could have sworn I saw it in like Tasha's or something.
Yeah. And so I think ultimately, like kind of the conclusion we're coming to from all this is there's a lot of really interesting ways to implement certain rules to make the campaigns seem more interesting. Not to always go back to it, but there is a animated spell book about the Goodberry spell, because one of the sort of things that's mentioned offhandedly in that is Goodberry fills you up. You have a single berry, you are full for the week. Full for the day. Sorry, my other laptop that I'm sort of watching us here is having troubles maintaining the thing, and I wasn't sure if that's just on the laptop or because I got my phone and it looks like it's fine. So sorry, I keep looking over the side and getting confused. Anyway, so you've got like Goodberry that'll make the they get food. In the same way that like I don't track arrows for the most part in my games. I don't know. Do you guys bother to have your players track ammunition?
Only if it's magical or something like that.
Yeah.
Or I have instituted when they critically fail that they're low on arrows. Because that's kind of fun.
Okay.
But I don't take them down to 0. I like you have 3 arrows left. You you do the Hawkeye moment of and so they've got 3 more shots. Like you can go around the battlefield and grab some of the arrows.
Yeah.
That's kind of
a fun way of doing it. But I could see something like a Viking game being more fun to be like, hey, so in the last raid you fired 19 of your 20 arrows. So as you're trying to like grab food rations and other stuff, don't forget to look for arrows. Because for the most part, like I assume that anyone that has a bow has the proficiency with it has also the knowledge of how to make arrows with the things that are around them. But like an Underdark campaign could be a lot of fun where it's just like, what are you eating? where are your arrows? Like, what are you doing? And then the players can get kind of inventive, where they're like, so I find this slate that breaks into these thin shards, and they're just firing chunks of rock.
Yes, and that actually could easily tie into even thematically that as we were saying, a metal game, because the Underdark is pretty metal.
Oh, it
I
really
mean,
is.
you have giant. Yeah, I mean, it just is. I mean, you have the stone dwarves, the Dwergar, who build like devices that are powered by pain. You know, and because like if you look through, like they have the shriekers and these weird creatures that punish the other dwarves that have gone against them, and they're like inside these machines and are fueling it with their pain. You don't get metal than that. That's metal AF, man.
The Durgar hammers, I think.
Yeah, and there's shriekers too that are another, like they use their screams to destroy rock.
That is hardcore metal.
Really fun. I'm trying to think of, because obviously, you know, sailing the seas and being underground is a little bit more difficult. But that being said, what could be really interesting is so you start your campaign off. You've got your group of Vikings. Make them either ocean or storm based. Let them stomp around, have some fun, and then they get swallowed. They're like a kraken and a whirlwind, and they end up in a deep underground lake, because one of the things that is a lot of times in the Underdark is those sort of like big lakes and stuff, and then you have that whole sort of thing where, you know, ironically, I think Vikings would be very well suited for the Underdark, and having almost no resources, because they can like go on raids to like Kuatoa villages to steal their stuff.
Yeah. You could also just institute, there's a horrible winter and you're going into the mountain to find a safe place to escape the storms. And so you were actually raiding against the dark elves and the, you know,
sounds
you're the bad guys to the bad guys.
Yeah. I love this idea. I don't know necessarily if something we can do for like kids adventures, but as a concept for a campaign, I really like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can go either way with that. It would also be fun to play like kobold, an entire group of kobolds trying to eke out a living, or just trying to survive and become powerful enough, you know, to do whatever.
I've always become the dragon, right?
I've always wanted to do a campaign. There is a magic card, bringing it back to magic, from Lorwyn called the Hamletback Goliath, where it's this giant that's wandering around, and he has a small village of goblins on his back. And I want to play that D&D campaign. Now, my original idea for it was that like one person would play the giant with the village on his back, and then the other players would essentially play as the village of goblins. Essentially, as they die, they would just be replaced with another goblin from the tribe, which of course is that fun thing where if you get your hero killed, you don't have a hero anymore. You've just got the schmuck goblins. And then the whole campaign would be essentially them trying to move their village on the back of this giant as like heroes are coming in to try and raid them. And that sort of thing. So they have to try and come up with interesting and inventive ways to take down these heroes, who are also trying interesting and inventive ways to try and take down their giant.
That would always be fun to have like a parallel group thing to do that. But that reminds me of another older role-playing game. I don't know if you've ever heard of, called Paranoia. It's a comedic
Happiness
game.
Is mandatory.
Yes, but imagine doing that with some weird like goblins or kobolds. You almost do a similar thing with like a warlock or a wizard, like trying to, you know,
like kobolds in like in a maze kind of thing, like doing experiments.
So real quick, Paranoia is a dystopian future, but everything's great. Communists are horrible.
Mandatory.
And happiness is mandatory. There's a computer who is the DM or the game master, and you are playing against the game, and you're trying to ingratiate yourself, but you have a certain number of clones because you are gonna die. And you can like requisition equipment, and it's this kind of weirdly humorous, dark fantasy. And it's but like saying, like it's that weird playing a different. You play it very differently than like D&D because you're not heroes.
One of my favorite things about like when it was explained to me, because I've only played like a session and it was weird, but one of my DMs loved it, and he explains that in this world, what was it? It is illegal to be part of a secret society, to be a mutant, or to have any sort of illicit skills. And during character creations, you pick your secret society, your mutation, and your illicit skills. And depending on how you roll. you may or may not lose some clones during the process because they're like, oh, this one's bad, kill it, let's start a new one. And like one of the adventures that he loved to mention was you've been deposited into the cafeteria. The breakfast machine is dispensing glass and nails. Breakfast is mandatory for a productive day. Eat your breakfast. And the door wouldn't open until you ate your breakfast. And so one of the characters was like, I try to eat the breakfast. And it's like, well, it's nails and glass, so you bleed to death and die. And then your clone enters the room. How do you get out?
Yeah,
sounds so depressing.
But playing that with a like archmage or something that's messing with a whole tribe of goblins or kobolds could be kind of fun. Or humans. I mean, you could just do the same thing.
Or like kobolds, like trying, or like goblins or things that live like as like the pests in a like fire giant colony, where like they're massively powerful, and like sometimes they happen to be in a room when that room is flooded with flames, and you die. Sucks to suck.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, it's or trying to survive in the outskirts of like a mind flayer hive, mind type thing, something horrible like that.
That would be
Where we lost a whole generation. Their brains were eaten. But
and then you could have to fight yourself later, or like or your good friend. You're like, well, there's Tim. He's got an intellect devourer in him, so I can't kill him because then I have to worry about the intellect devourer. But he knows that I'm here, so I should probably be running. Yeah, I should definitely be running.
Yeah, no, there's lots of. I mean, D&D. There's so many options. You have like necromancers, and and all that kind of stuff. Because it also another weirdly metal thing. They don't really have rules for it, but you could skirt the rules. Playing a resurrected party that is trying to escape the necromancer that wants to control them could be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds good.
Yeah. So you're just.
You have it be one of those things where like during. Oh, sorry. Say it.
Trying to find a place to lay down and die where you don't have to keep fighting for the necromancer.
Yeah, or like one of those things where like during the day you have your own faculties, but as soon as night hits, you wake up the next morning and you're like, well, I've got new cuts and bumps and shoot.
And all I can taste is brains.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that was one of the interesting scenarios that I ended up being in. So the group ends up at this this tomb of Decanthar that has that's filled with undead that don't realize they're undead, and the sort of leader is this brother and sister that had ended up killing each other in life. So they became, of course, a Bone Lord. But during the day, one of them was in control, and during the night, the other one was in control. So it was very interesting about this particular scenario was because a lot of times, players will get into a fight, and then they'll take a long rest, and they'll be ready for a new thing. Well, in the morning, the early AM, they got in a fight with a wizard monk because I decided that running NPCs wasn't hard enough as it was. And they, he was not a slouch. They had to put some effort in. They also cast some spells earlier that morning because they weren't sure if if the sun was going to come up in time and the other NPCs were going to. Anyway, long story short, they had to then fight to raid a fortification before they could take a long rest because they'd already slept the night, and as soon as daybreak, as soon as the sun goes down, it switches back over to the villain that they don't have friends with. So they had to. So it was really interesting to like force them to like really utilize all their stuff because a lot of times wizards don't get to the end of their spells for the most part. Barbarians don't generally run out of rage, but having it so like no, you have to have two major fights, one in the morning, one before the sun goes down, like that really made for an interesting thing, and one of those ones where they're like, what do I got? And I think there was some just skeletons that have been thrown in the middle because there was a bag of holding that happened to have skeletons in it. And they're like, we're just gonna dump it out on the floor. I'm like, sweet, roll initiative.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And like I said, like there's also like that whole concept of what metal is usually just more extreme and more violent. It's a splatter punk for the old school. Like it's going to tend to be more gory. So like obviously it's not kids, but you're going to want to describe those wounds as they're hitting, because that's going to be it's going to be visceral, and the heads are going to get lopped off. That's that's that kind of thing. Or you can play it for fun and do more of the like I guess hair metal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and just kind of do like what is on the side of the van. The wizard on the side of the van, that is me.
Yeah.
I have the Valkyries with the metal bikinis, and we fight.
Yeah. And they're magically enchanted to protect them. Clearly.
Yes, of course.
Magical.
That's second edition D&D.
Yeah.
No. I know in a campaign as a player, I'm trying to play this hardcore metal bard, and I'm playing him more like a punk bard instead of hardcore metal. But that's just kind of like, because I already built a playlist of punk instead of heavy metal. I'm like, gosh darn it!
Yeah.
That'll happen.
Punk and heavy metal hit very similar, depending on the era. Yeah.
Depending on the era. Yeah. The problem is the era of my music is just, it's punk.
It's more,
I wonder.
So yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Yeah, fighting larger than life creatures is always good. I'm trying to think of some of them more like, what you would pull in. And like I said, like a bleak setting is always good. Like I said, even the idea of going into the Underdark, or like I said, fighting, or like I said, being controlled by a necromancer. Even playing those Vikings and like you're being resurrected just to keep attacking a town is interesting. You're just trying to keep your parts together long enough to enjoy the I lost an arm, but I'm coming back tomorrow night.
Well, I mean, the whole thing with the Valhalla and all that stuff is if you die in battle, the Valkyries take you to Valhalla. At which point you wait until Ragnarok. Ragnarok's not going to be a fun thing. Sure, you get to drink until then, but like that might be interesting too. Of like, you make your character, like make them 5 or 10 or whatever, and they'll be like, how did your character die in battle? You have that awesome story about how they died, and then you're like, all right, Ragnarok started. How are you going to stop the unstoppable creature that is Fenris? He is literally a god eater. What do you do?
Yeah, and that's another one is you can pull from. There's so many odd bits and bobs in Norse mythology. You have Odin and his ravens, and you have his 8-legged, I believe. I always forget.
Yeah, I think it's
one of his children. It's actually one of my favorite stories. Back in the day, they wanted to build a wall around. What's the name of their castle? Is that Valhalla?
In Valhalla, it's I think.
I always forget what but they basically wanted this wall around it, and this guy was like, "I'll do it, but I want her." And I think he wanted Freya or something, and Loki was like, "Yeah, no, sure, let's do it. But you have to get it done by the end of winter." And everyone else is like, "No, Loki, you can't make that. What are you doing?" And he's like, "No, it's fine. He can't possibly do this. It's the middle of winter, A. And B, it's the middle of winter." However, this dude starts making this wall like a monster. He's got this horse that is hanging out with him, dragging the stones there. He's just slapping them down. They're like, "Loki, fix this. He's going to finish it." And we gave him our word, so we'll have to end up giving away Freya. So Loki, in his infinite wisdom, changes into a mare, which is a lady horse, and he distracts the horse away. And then later he comes to Odin with this 8-legged horse and is like, "Hey man, that's my bad. Here's my kid."
Yeah.
I don't know if y'all knew this, but Loki's is a crazy pants.
Yeah. Hey, we can turn into anything. Bad things can happen. So I don't know if you. Speaking of the actual Valhalla, which I just looked it up and I was like, oh yeah, it is called Valhalla because Valhalla means Hall of the Slain. So that is. There's a movie. I don't know if either of you have ever seen it called Eric the Viking.
Yes.
Starring Tim Robbins. That would be another fun one because most people haven't seen it. Because that involves, that's a strange one. You've got Eartha Kitt in that movie. You've got Tim Robbins as the main. It's directed by one of the Viking or the Monty Python guys, Terry Jones, directed that one. But it's got berserkers, and I love my favorite. I've always wanted to play a character based off of the priest there's a Christian priest in the village who goes along on their journey, but he doesn't believe in anything. So they run into all these creatures and he just doesn't see them. He just completely they even end up at Valhalla and he's just walking around going, "What are you all reacting to?" And he just walks through walls and stuff. He has no clue what's going on.
Yeah. There was something like similar in Narnia, I think, actually. Kind of a similar concept of, like, because they didn't believe that they were released from the thing, one of the dwarves was stuck in, like, this tiny room. But yeah, no, that would be actually really interesting to play around with, is the idea of, like, having sort of conflicting faiths. So you'd have your sort of Terry Gilman. Is Terry Gilman in that one? Is that
Terry
the priest?
No, it's Terry Jones. Because so in it, and basically, so there's a never-ending winter. It's already at. They have to awaken the gods to deal with Ragnarok, and that's what the Vikings have to do. And they go on a sail. It's a whole journey thing. It's a straight story, but yeah, it's Terry Jones plays the weird, the guy on the Island of Delights or whatever it's called.
Well, I think that actually would also be a really fun one to do, is like the whole kind of Viking theme is that sort of like going on a journey, kind of like to a location. And I think that could be really fun because again, we go back to that murder hobo thing of, like, you know, the whole idea of being a hobo is that you don't have a home. But if you're a Viking, you've got that longboat that's your home. So that could be really interesting that way. I've done a couple campaigns where the players start out on a ship. But that one's much more of like they're teleported onto the ship against their will, because it makes life a little easier. But anyway,
I think when you're dealing with typically adults, you can get everybody to buy in and go, what's your role on the ship? You can be any character class, but let's figure out how you fit on the ship. You know, are you the weather wizard that, you know, makes the weather nice so we don't aren't constantly going backwards? You know, are you the cleric that inspires the group, or the bard that inspires the group with, maybe you play the drums into the rowing of the boat?
Oh man, you could do some I always go back. My favorite bard subclass will always be the College of Glory. That would be great for Vikings. Like, the first thing that happens is he blows the war horn. Everyone gets temporary hit points and gets to move for free as a reaction without provoking. That's awesome. Or as like we need to run now. Come on, guys, back on the ship. You know, you hit them with that. They don't provoke. They get to make a full move. They get the temporary hit points. Like, that could be really fun.
Which reminds me of another cool thing is there's some magic items that very much fit in with the Norse theme. Like there's the horn of, I think it's Horn of Glory, one where you blow it and all the Viking warriors come.
Yes. Yep.
So yeah, there's some weird magic items like that. Just the horns in general. I mean,
Ring of Blasting, I think would be appropriate.
It'd be kind of fun to reskin that one as something else, like a horn, but does the blasting would be kind of fun. I mean, because a lot of times...
No, it's Ring of the Ram, Horn of Blasting. That's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. The Ring of the Ram. Actually, the Ring of the Ram, reskinning that is like, you know, a lot of different things. But,
and also, so the Ghost of Saltmarsh, while it does have a lot of really awesome sort of like naval-based adventures, one of the other things it has that I love about it is it has really detailed ship mechanics. Like, it turns the whole like naval combat into the very fascinating thing where all the parts of the ship are sort of broken down into different pieces. You've got the helm, you've got the sails, you've got the oars if you have them, the hull itself, and the weapons. Each of them have different armor classes and hit points, and then as they take damage, certain things start happening. So if you're damaging the sails, for every, I think, 25 damage, the speed of the boat decreases by 5. It's really interesting in that it's just that part of it. But then there's also the... there's a whole like sort of naval encounters section. So there's like different islands, what you can find on those islands. And then there's also just like sea encounters. It's got like in the same way that Xanathar's Guide has the different sort of locations and the encounter tables. It has like an ocean encounter table, like on the ocean and then underwater. Whereas I think Xanathar's Guide only does coastal. But yeah, no, and honestly, that book I think is one of those ones that I think unfortunately sort of flew under the radar, because it is a lot of it is, you know, like campaign stuff. But if you're doing anything on the water, around the water, near the water, That book is amazing. Like the just the sheer volume of cool stuff it has in it is very nice.
Yeah, no, it totally is. It has a ton of great stuff in there for using. I'm trying to look up my list. My computer is deciding I don't need to see it. So I was going to bring up some of the unusual like Norse monsters, because you of course have like
Yes.
I don't know if I'm assuming that most of you, or I know Rob, you played it. Elder Scrolls, the Draugr, they're the Viking zombies / vampires.
Yes.
That's from North. That's another great for going into a burial mound to pull stuff out. The Draugr are great. And then there's the really weird ones. Like my absolute favorite. I've used it once and it creeped the group out a little too much. The Knuckleavy. It's a very weird centaur-like creature. But it, I think I know like in Pathfinder had a version of it. But the actual version I'm thinking of, it's like imagine a horse type creature with a horrible fanged mouth, but skinned, and on its back is a rider, but it's grafted to the thing, and it wields a giant sword. It is pretty, you don't get much more metal than that. It's like a kind of equivalent of being
definitely seen a metal album with that thing on it. Like that is absolutely on there.
Yeah.
There's also that classic one with the guy on the horse. He's kind of leaned forward with the spear and the shield. I always forget which one that one is.
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, but
it's a good one.
But yeah, but I mean that can also be fun because you can delving into folklore. I mean, a lot of stuff's already been pilfered in D&D, but it's finding out what the sources are. So like like in Norse mythology, they don't really have normal dragons. They have like the Lenorm, which are like two-legged corpse terrors and stuff like that. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah, the Lenorm are like, imagine like a dragon that's more like a worm, but instead of having 4 limbs and it has no wings, it's gigantic and has 2 front paws.
Yeah,
and they're usually.
You said something about a corpse. A corpse? What now?
Corpse, right? Well, I think the literal there's different Lenorm, and one of it's like I don't speak Norwegian, but yeah, it translates like corpse grinder because they like eat the dead. Yeah, like a ghoul type of thing. Another again, if you want to delve into something for metal things, the Norse mythology has a lot of just folklore would be a better term for that.
And even just to sort of jump across the pond, well, not the pond, just to jump across that strait there into the Celtic stuff, like the oh goodness, the fairies of those stories are really interesting, especially because you've got like their fae are fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
What was
they're very interesting.
Me of that. But actually, that could be a really interesting campaign. Is to have like the Norse gods and the Fae sort of kind of running into trouble between each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you get your sort of naked druids fighting against the. What was it? You mentioned the corpse thing.
Yeah, it's. I'm looking it up. As I'm seeing a bunch of them, like the tassel worm and the. Basically they just mean they all mean worm. The Lindorm or Linorm.
WYRM, the like dragon worm.
Yeah. Yes. So it depends on the translation, but yeah, there's just a bunch of them. They usually they're like depicted in heraldry a lot. But when they show like the snake-like dragons.
Yeah, with the 2 limbs. I assume that was just because it was hard to make heraldry look like it had 4 limbs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a dragon without wings. It's this kind of, but they're unique. But it's, you pull dragons from any different culture. There's a lot of dragons. Like Asian dragons tend to be the same kind of snake-like bodies, and they usually don't have wings, but they fly.
Yeah.
Your classic.
Because they're just cool. They're just epic to fly. Yeah, like that.
I feel like dragons are one of those things that, like, it is Dungeons and Dragons, but I feel like dragons are sort of often neglected. Personally, because the breath weapon could be so immediately devastating. I think a young dragon does 10d8. I want to say for their breath weapon.
It does some
white dragon.
It does ridiculous amounts of damage
with a 30-foot cone.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's a huge space and it's ridiculous damage. But it's just one of those monsters that you're like, oh my gosh, I am terrified of you. Um,
In fact, I think
yeah,
adult dragons have an aura of terror.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I they don't really they have them in D&D, but they have guardian drakes, which are like lesser dragons. I don't remember which book introduced them. I think it's well, I don't. I want to say it's like Bolo. It's one of Bolo's Mordenkainen's, one of those, but they're not quite dragons. And I wish they need to have like that like not intelligent dragons, so you can slay a dragon that's not a dragon.
Yeah.
Because you try and take on like a young adult dragon, and that's not even counting you go against. But they also fight you because they're smart. So like that cone weapon is going to be used efficiently,
Yeah.
and they're going to keep out of reach, and they're going to mess you up. And not to mention if you got spells on top of that, ugh, yeah.
dude,
Yeah, I think more like animalistic dragons would be a really interesting thing to, because yeah, in those metal sort of things, you're not fighting a dragon that's like, you know, intelligent.
Unless
super
it's the main
intelligent.
villain. I mean, because I could see the one who's behind the scenes. You're actually claiming land for a white dragon. That you don't realize is the person in charge. You thought that was just the town elder, but it's the white beard is in fact White Worm, and he's
Oh man, that
that
would
kind
be a
of
really fun one. Yeah, because like you can spend the whole thing like going on your raids, taking out these things, amassing wealth for them, and then the reveal is just like, no, I'm a dragon.
yeah.
It's mine.
You are dragon sworn, and
And
like
the
your Halberd could all be dragons, and you wouldn't even notice
oh
because
man, and it'd be fun too
the
because
whole front of your ship's a dragon. Why do you think that is?
right. Well, and like yeah, like there's a particularly large population of dragonborn in your villages, and well, and also be really fun too because like every time you're raiding, like if you bother to talk to like stop and talk to someone, then they would be like, why do you serve the dragon? But it's also one of those things where like I feel like back in the day you would call someone the dragon as like a form of reverence, so like that was just sort of their name. So I think that could be an interesting sort of misunderstanding where like eventually they're just like, wait, that wasn't like they were being lit like they literally meant he's a dragon, not just like
Well,
he's
yeah,
a
you could also
dragon.
be. Yeah, it's like my favorite is Dracula just means son of the dragon, because
Does it really?
That's
yes.
cool.
So like if you threw the name Dracula, you've screwed up. Everybody's gonna be like, oh god, it's a vampire,
Well,
and it's like no 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 no.
I would
No, no, no.
say
Working with
there
a dragon.
are like vampire spawn are I think a little bit more metal than like it's that
Yeah.
more I think animalisticness of it in the same way like an intelligent dragon isn't necessarily metal and like sort of Viking style. It's more like that sort of just like raw sort of animal fury that you have to worry about. So like vampire spawn I could see being a lot more sort of fitting in with the Viking style. That being said, like that could be really interesting too to play around with because vampires historically are their weakest when traveling over water. I don't remember why exactly, but
Can't cross running water thing.
yeah, so that could be really interesting to try and like you're like we know that Dracula is crossing the thing, so we've got to try and get to his ship, raid his ship, get through all the others vampire spawn, and then take him out. Otherwise, he will land on our shores, and we can do nothing about that.
Yeah. Well, plus like the long winters would be great for.
Oh
us.
man, actually, that'd be a really great Viking thing too, where you're just like, yeah, no, we've got vampires a lot. Like they're
Yeah.
all over the place.
That's
We
one of
need
the
to stop
things.
this.
Yeah, in Rime of the Frost Maiden, it's perpetually winter. But
Yes.
one of the things I like the idea of is like the Dwergar are a big threat, the Grey Dwarves, because they've
Yes.
realized they can move about during all the time.
Yeah.
And so, it's like they're perpetually underground because there's no,
Yeah.
they aren't affected by that. And all the creatures that are affected normally badly by the sun don't have to worry about it. So you got vampires everywhere and all that. So that's another one to consider is like all those underdark creatures would love the far
Well,
north.
and you could even do something that would be really interesting, where like you're a Viking raiding party, and doing your thing, having fun, and then this sort of perpetual storm starts sort of moving in, and come to find out, you could do the Rime of the Frost Maiden obviously because it's fun, but then also you could do something with like the Durgar and vampires are working together. So now you've got to deal with the technology of the Durgar, and then the just sort of like the sort of conquering ability of vampires. and you're like, I have to go raid these towns and try to suss it out. And that'd also be fun too, is trying to figure out like what is happening, why is this happening. And then you could also, oh man, you could have a lot of those like sort of dragon things, having been subterranean up until recently. They're starting to come out and cause problems. And then of course you've got good old fashioned Jormungandr.
Another one to
world
think
snake.
of, Viking, but it's very much in the same vein. Beowulf, Grendel.
Yes.
Yeah, it's another like your basic like, because that's a creature that's just to destroy, but behind it is its mother. And so that's
Yeah.
another one like think of in that vein. There's usually like the kind of thing that will destroy, and then there's the thinking sorcerer,
Yeah.
dragon, whatever. That's the actual threat, because you're like, oh, we won, and it's like, oh no,
No,
now
no.
we've just pissed off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I think that all has like a role in it. But what you're saying about vampires, one of the things I think that would make the vampire thing metal is the fact that they aren't really hurt by anything. So when you have a guy running into town and he can just take swords after swords, there's swords sticking all out of this guy, and he's just picking them up and breaking them in half.
Yep.
And werewolves work the same. Although werewolves, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Werewolves aren't affected by, they're literally immune to every
Bludgeoning, slashing,
weapon
and piercing
Yeah.
from
from non-magical
non-silvered.
weapons.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you don't let the characters have magical items, or there's something they have to do, so if they're
Or if
like
there's
blast
one magic
items,
item amongst the whole group.
yeah, or clerics become super necessary in that whole like, if you can pull that off.
Bless the weapon kind of thing. Oh, that'd
yeah.
be fun too.
Mhm.
So also, for those of you listening, and for anyone out there, read the book Beowulf. The movie doesn't give it justice in the slightest. But also, I love like the stuff where they're hanging out in the hall before. What was its name? I forgot its name. The critter.
The creature is Grendel.
Grendel. Before Grendel attacks. Like, they're talking about the whole reason that Beowulf lost this swimming match where they swam for like 13 miles in the ocean was because he had to like wrestle like 13 sea monsters or something like that. It's kind of an offhanded boast thing, but at the same time, it's like that's the kind of D&D thing you could do, and that could be kind of fun. Actually, it would be really fun is you have these old retired Vikings sitting around talking about their stories, and then every sort of session is their recalling of these things, where you go back to them at lower levels and like you go through that adventure. And so the retelling of these sort of bar stories is actually that you playing out those bar stories. And you could do other fun stuff too, like have that be your kind of your framework for the story. And then after you've done like, 5, 8, 10 sessions, be like, all right, it's time to go to bed. And then you take these, level 15 characters, they go to sleep, and then then Grendel attacks. Beowulf was a monk, if I remember correctly, because I think he ripped Grendel's arm off with his bare hands. Because
I'd say he's probably a fighter with some kind of feat, one of the unarmed feats.
That's fair. Or yeah.
Yeah.
That story is delightfly absurd. Like the book is so much fun, just for the sheer madness of it. Give it a read.
Yeah,
it's worth it.
You were talking about telling the stories. It doesn't really curtail with the metal thing, but there's an relatively another role-playing game called The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, in which you're all trying to outdo each other with the weirder stories. And so like there's actually a framework to it. And so like you're each kind of messing with everybody's stories, and it's a lot of fun. It's not really a role-playing game so much as a activity, because it has rules, but you're just trying to outdo with the weirdest story of how you pulled yourself by your own hair up to the moon, that kind of thing. I don't know if you've seen, that's Terry Gilliam, I'm referring to Gilliam before. He did the movie The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. It has like Robin Williams and a bunch of other people in it. But yeah, it's Baron Munchausen is like a classic. Like that's where they get the term Munchausen's by proxy, because he is supposed to be this character that just makes crap up. Because he just is a constant. His stories are too crazy to be real. He rode on a cannonball to go fight the Turks, that kind of thing. But yeah, in this game, you're trying to come up with those stories, and you're trying to get your free drinks from everybody else. I have like a hardcover of the old book, but I haven't played it in years. It was like a college thing, but yeah. But that reminded me of it, because that you could do a similar thing.
Yeah.
Of trying to one up.
I feel like we should, maybe not this next one, but here soon we should actually go, because we're talking a lot about this the Gork Mork Bork.
Gork. I have it right here. Or no, I closed my window. Dang it. Mork Bork. Mork.
Yeah.
Mork Bork. It sounds so ridiculous when you say it out loud.
It really does. We should definitely like actually go over some of the rules and mechanics of that one. I've had a copy that's been sitting in my room that I just haven't gotten around to buying yet. It's basically since we did the shopping network. But I don't know. I think it's nice to sort of to kind of get out of your to look at other games. Like Fate was one of those ones where for many years I played only D&D. And then, it was my freshman year of college. I had a guy that I was playing games with, and he was like, "Hey, so have you heard of this game called Exalted?" And I was like, "No, I don't know anything about that." And he's like, "Cool, perfect. Then we're going to have you." So it was just like his way of diving us into that game was magical. He was also an amazing DM. But then from that, it sort of opened up the world of mage and werewolf and vampire, which werewolf as a game is a really metal system. But that's an entirely different system. Which
I know, speaking of...
Changeling was the one I loved the most. What's up?
Requires a lot of backstory. It's the only thing. It's hard to get, because you have to kind of know a lot to start playing, because it's got a lot of little weird words and things that it's once you know it, it's just there, but like you don't realize how crazy that world is.
The worm and the weave, and it's wackadoo.
Dispo form.
Dang. Well, I know I'm working on reading through Pathfinder 2nd edition.
Oh yeah.
Expand my horizons.
That might be a nice one to dive into as well.
I'm delightful. It's hard because it's super rules heavy. But as I've been reading it, and I'm always reading like 3 different role-playing game books. So I've got several. I've been the most recent edition of Call of Cthulhu is sitting next to me, and it's like that kind of thing. So I've got Fate, because I played it in the day, but I don't know the rules well. So
I really also am a huge fan of the West End games Star Wars. And I would love to sit down with you guys and just go on ad nauseum about that game, because I said it before, but one of the things I find very, very fascinating, and I think returning to our kind of Vikings point, having mechanics and things that you focus on serve to better create the atmosphere of the game. I think that the Star Wars, the West End Star Wars game does a really good job about that, where like your 6 attributes. Normally, you get strength, dex, constitution. It's your attributes. I'm going to forget them now. But it's dexterity, perception, knowledge, body, mechanical, and technical. So, like, one of your attributes is how mechanically savvy you are and how technically savvy you are. And the fact that the 6 stats that you have, and all skills fall under one of those 6 stats, but the fact that those are like, that's what you care about. Like, it really changes what you're interested in. Because, like in the same way that D&D has 3 separate combat stats, strength, dexterity, and constitution, but only 1 social stat, charisma, really speaks to D&D being designed as a game that's designed for combat more than sort of social interactions. So I find that always very, very fascinating of like what mechanics did the game decide to care about, and what things is it just sort of like, we can yada yada that away. So
yeah, no, there's a lot. I mean, every system is very, you can pull a lot out of it. It's like one of the games I've played the most, but I've never played a good version of it, because I played almost every version of it. I don't know if any of you have ever played Gamma World or heard of it. Gamma World was like the sci-fi spin-off to D&D. That's how it started. So it's post-apocalyptic.
TSR era?
Yeah, TSR originally did it. And it was really just D&D stats, or in the first editions, like D&D stats, like you had mutations. So you could play as like a pure strain human or a mutated animal or a mutated plant. And you were the goofiest characters, but that's a lot of fun. Like when you're just like, but you had the random thing, like I'm a porcupine, but I've got tentacles, and I can psychically probe your mind, like because you get weird mutations. What? Yeah, it's bizarre. And later editions kind of got more humor to them, where you're like wielding a stop sign as a shield, and like you have no idea how things work, and they'll blow up in your face. And you think, you're afraid of a cell phone, but then you pick up a gun and put it up to your ear to try and hear it.
Hello?
But like it has this humor to it that was good, but man, it has never had a great system. And they've done it. I think there's 6 editions of Gamma World. Like it's crazy how many editions they've done.
They really tried.
Oh, but I've played most of them, and it always goes over. You have a blast making a character, and then you go to play it, and you're like, oh, this is the clunkiest thing.
Yep.
I've always that's always one of those that like, I've always wanted to find a simple version. I've actually got on my hard drive like a 5th edition alteration that I could run, because my son and his friends, I ran them through like a quick, like here's one of the early editions, and they were just like, I have a kung fu duck, and I am a tree. Yeah, what was the tree's name?
Kung fu duck is an amazing sentence.
That's where he grew up, out of the acorn. That kind of thing. And so it's, and you have a bit of Fallout in there, and you're kind of, it's fun. And I've always wanted to make that one, but that's just that weird. In terms of like playing random systems, I think I have the most varied in the group, but that's also because I'm slightly older than you. And I've been playing forever. Actually, we're pretty close to our time. Do we have anything else?
We're just at about time.
Yeah. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I think ultimately, what all of this comes down to is, firstly, Vikings are great material for campaigns. Secondly, metal is a great inspiration for campaigns, and we all want to play in one of those. But also, I think what we can also take away from this is we're all very, very excited for this year coming up. We've just dove into a new year, and we have a lot of games that I think would be a lot of fun to share with you guys. If there's anything that you would like for us to deep dive into, if you have questions for us, feel free. We've got our email down here. Zulu's dnd@gmail.com. Also, if you go to Zulu's Games and you go to community, there is a link to our Discord. Feel free to hop in there. If you do @employee, it'll we'll see it. It will show up on my phone. We actually had a nice long meeting today about sort of what our RPG program will look like going forward. So keep your eye out. There's gonna be a lot of fun new stuff in the coming months. I'm personally very excited for it, including the possibility of us getting to play a game as part of our job. So you can see what it looks like when we.
Everything quite a bit, so that should be that's a lot to look forward to. I'm excited.
Sweet. Yeah, I'm super hyped for this year. It's going to be awesome. I'm so excited. It's going to be great.
But until then, everybody stay safe out there, and we will see you next week.
Yes.
Goodbye. Bye, everyone.